The air was thick with the scent of salt and sun-warmed wood as Adrian Vaughn stepped off the speedboat onto the private dock of Solara Cove. The ocean stretched endlessly before him, a vast expanse of deep sapphire under the waning afternoon light. His arrival was met with quiet efficiency. A resort staff member dressed in crisp linen offered a courteous nod. "Mr. Vaughn, your villa has been prepared. The arrangements for your meeting tomorrow are in place as requested." Adrien barely acknowledged him. His mind was elsewhere, on the contract waiting to be finalized, on the numbers that dictated the rise and fall of fortunes. He had come here not for rest, not for the allure of this so-called paradise, but to secure a deal that would push Vaughn Global Investments into an even greater sphere of influence. The scent of blooming frangipani filled the air as he made his way towards his private suite. The world around him shimmered with beauty. Pristine beaches, luxurious overwater bungalows, the distant sound of laughter carried by the breeze. Yet none of it touched him. He had long since taught himself that success left no room for distractions. Turning to his assistant, he spoke in his usual clipped tone. "Go over tomorrow's itinerary again. I want it airtight." The assistant gave a quick nod, but Adrien had already moved on, his thoughts aligned with precision, his heart walled off from anything unnecessary. On the other side of the resort, Cassandra Ellis stepped onto the wooden pier, her twin sons, Noah and Liam, tugging eagerly at her hands. The boys were brimming with excitement, their eyes drinking in the sight of the floating villas and golden beaches. "Mom, this place is amazing." Noah's voice was filled with awe. "It looks like a dream." Liam added, his gaze flickering over the shimmering water. Cassandra smiled, warmth filling her chest. They deserved this. Every ounce of joy, every second of wonder. She had fought for it. 7 years of late nights, of stretching every dollar, of promising herself that one day she would give them more. This wasn't just a vacation. It was proof that no matter how much life had taken from her, she had still won something back. As she led them towards the check-in area, her gaze drifted, just for a moment, towards the couples walking hand in hand, the families sharing quiet moments together. A familiar pang echoed inside her. Once she had dreamed of a life like that, a life where love wasn't something lost in the past. But the man she had once loved had disappeared without a trace, Adrian Vaughn. The name surfaced like an old wound, sharp and sudden. She had spent years locking that part of her past away, building walls to keep it from hurting her again. This trip was for her sons, nothing else. She exhaled, letting the ocean breeze carry away the weight of old memories. But fate was already at work, weaving an encounter neither of them could escape. That evening, Solara Cove glowed under a sky dusted with stars. The soft strum of live music drifted from the open-air restaurant, blending with the distant rhythm of waves. Candles flickered along the wooden walkways, casting golden reflections onto the water's surface. And within the quiet hum of paradise, two paths edged closer. Unknowing, inevitable. The night wrapped Solara Cove in a hush of tranquility, the waves murmuring against the stilts of the overwater villas. Adrian Vaughn loosened his tie as he walked along the wooden pathway, his thoughts a tangled mess of calculations and contingencies. The deal, one that had seemed ironclad, had hit an unexpected snag. His partners had inserted a last-minute clause that complicated everything. Negotiations would resume in the morning. But right now, all he wanted was a cold shower and a moment of silence. His assistant had handed him the key earlier, and without paying much attention, he let himself into the villa assigned to him. The room was dimly lit, filled with a soft glow from bedside lamps. A faint scent of vanilla and coconut lingered in the air, subtle, familiar, stirring something he couldn't quite place. He took a step inside, shoulders stiff from exhaustion. It wasn't until he saw her that he realized something was wrong. She stood near the bed, her long chestnut hair cascading down her back, her figure illuminated by the warm light. She wasn't alone. 2 children, twin boys, no older than 7, lay tucked beneath the sheets. Cassandra Ellis had just finished adjusting their blankets, her expression tender as she whispered a quiet goodnight. Adrien's breath caught. His pulse thundered in his ears. The boys. Even in the dim light, he saw it. The familiar shape of their faces, the striking green of their eyes, the mischievous curve of their smiles. He had seen that face before. In the mirror, in old childhood photos, his body locked in place, the world narrowing to this one impossible moment. Cassandra turned, her gaze colliding with his. The blood drained from her face. For a moment, silence reigned, thick and suffocating. 7 years. 7 years had passed since he had walked out of her life, since he had disappeared without a word. And now, standing before her, was the man she had tried so desperately to forget, the man staring at the children she had raised alone. Adrien tried to speak, but nothing came out. He had spent years mastering control, handling billion-dollar negotiations without faltering. Yet now he was paralyzed by a truth he hadn't been prepared for. Cassandra clenched her fists, her breath uneven. She wanted to shut the door, to push him out before he could shatter everything she had built. But when she spoke, her voice trembled. "What are you doing here?" Adrien swallowed hard, his mind racing. But there was only one thought, one question that consumed him entirely. Are they mine? The realization sent a crack through the foundation of everything he had built. 7 years. 7 years he had buried himself in his career, never once looking back. And now, staring at the undeniable truth in front of him, he felt the ground shift beneath his feet. Cassandra took a step toward him, her voice sharp and low. "Get out." He didn't move. His gaze remained locked on the boys, on the life he had never known existed. He wanted to say something, to ask, to explain, but his throat was tight, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. "I said, get out." Her voice cut through the silence like a blade. This time, there was no room for hesitation. Adrien blinked, his expression unreadable, then slowly nodded. He turned toward the door, but just as he reached for the handle, he paused. Without looking back, he spoke, his voice hoarse, filled with something raw. "Why didn't you tell me?" Cassandra let out a quiet, bitter laugh. "Tell you?" she repeated, her tone sharp with disbelief. "For what? So you could leave all over again? So you could look at them as an inconvenience?" She took a slow, deliberate breath, her gaze cutting through him. "You made your choice, Adrien. You walked away. You never came back. So tell me, why does it matter to you now?" He had no answer, because she was right. With nothing left to say, Adrien lowered his head and walked out, leaving behind a silence so heavy it felt impossible to breathe. Outside, the night was quiet, the ocean stretching endlessly beyond the edge of the villa. But inside, memories that had been buried for years stirred back to life, demanding to be faced. Fate had never truly let them go. It had only been waiting. The waves whispered against the wooden stilts of Solara Cove, carrying the salty breeze through the open windows. But no matter how soothing the ocean's lullaby was, sleep remained elusive for two souls trapped in separate villas, Cassandra Ellis and Adrian Vaughn. Each was haunted by the past, by memories that once felt like a dream, only to turn into a wound that never fully healed. Cassandra closed her eyes, and the past unraveled like an old film reel, faded yet painfully vivid. She remembered the first time she met Adrien, charismatic, razor-sharp, ambitious to the core. He had a way of making the world tilt in his favor, and she had fallen for him without hesitation, believing he was the man she would build her future with. They had been happy once. Long nights spent on the balcony of his Manhattan apartment, glasses of red wine in hand. His gaze, both tender and searing, locking onto hers beneath the glow of city lights. Cold winter evenings wrapped in his embrace. The way they laughed over failed attempts at cooking together. The dreams they had painted so effortlessly, dreams she thought would last. "Do you ever think about having a family?" she had asked one night, stars glimmering above them. Adrien had chuckled, pulling her close. "I've never really thought about it, but if I ever do, I'd only want it with you." That answer had melted her heart. She had believed him. And then he left. No warning, no explanation. Just a brief, detached farewell. "I have to go away for work." She had waited. She had called. She had sent messages, desperate at first, then hesitant, then resigned. Each unanswered attempt chipped away at her hope. Maybe he was busy. Maybe he just needed time. 1 month, 2 months, 6 months. Adrian Vaughn had vanished. No calls, no letters, no goodbye. Cassandra had drowned in heartbreak, nights spent staring at the ceiling, waiting for a closure that never came. She buried herself in work, trying to erase his presence from her life, but no distraction was strong enough to fill the void he left behind. And then 2 bold pink lines changed everything. The pregnancy test stared back at her, forcing her into a reality she wasn't prepared for. She tried again, one last time. She called. His number was disconnected. She sent emails. No response. She went to her doctor's appointments alone. When the nurse asked about the father, she bit her lip, unable to answer. Still, she hoped. She prayed that one day, he would walk through the door, take her in his arms, and tell her it was all a mistake. But he never came back. So she did what she had to do. She carried the weight of 2 growing lives inside her, enduring the nausea, exhaustion, and sleepless nights without a single hand to hold. She worked late hours, saved every penny, prepared herself for motherhood alone. And when the day of labor came, she clutched the hospital bed sheets as waves of pain crashed over her, fighting back tears because no one was there to whisper, "You'll be okay." She was alone, until she wasn't. When the doctor placed her newborns in her arms, a different kind of tears spilled down her cheeks. "Welcome to the world, my loves. I will never leave you." From that moment on, her life was no longer her own. She rocked them to sleep through endless nights, worked 2 jobs to pay for rent, sacrificed every piece of herself to make sure her boys never felt the absence of a father. And now, after 7 years of fighting, struggling, surviving, Adrien was back. As if time had never moved forward, as if those 7 years hadn't left scars on her heart. 7 years ago, Adrien had everything: a skyrocketing career, million-dollar deals, an empire waiting at his feet. He had spent his life chasing power, pushing himself higher, further. But in exchange, he had sacrificed something irreplaceable: Cassandra. Back then, he thought he was making the logical choice. He had been assigned to a major overseas project, a deal that could cement his place among the elite. "I'll only be gone for a few months, and then I'll come back." That had been the promise. But a few months turned into half a year, then longer. At first, he had meant to call her. He had planned to explain, but work swallowed him whole. The pressure, the late nights, the never-ending cycle of success, he convinced himself that waiting a little longer wouldn't matter. And then, somewhere along the way, reaching out felt impossible. What would he even say? That he had abandoned her for his career? That he had let her slip away because he thought there would always be time to fix things? So he did what he had been trained to do. He buried it. He told himself that maybe she had moved on, that maybe it was for the best. He never imagined that when he walked away, he hadn't just left Cassandra behind. He had left behind a family he never knew existed. And now, standing on the edge of the life he had unknowingly abandoned, Adrian Vaughn was about to face the one thing he had spent years avoiding: the truth. The night outside was calm, but inside, 2 hearts wrestled with a storm that had been waiting 7 years to be reckoned with. Fate had finally caught up with them, and it wasn't letting go this time. Adrian Vaughn had spent years believing a lie. That once he secured his future, once he had built his empire, he could return. That she would still be waiting, that they could pick up where they left off. But time had moved on. Months blurred into years. One deal after another, one boardroom after another. He had drowned himself in the corporate world, convincing himself that love could wait. And then when he finally realized he needed her, it was too late. At first, he had been afraid. Afraid to reach out. Afraid to hear she had moved on, that she had found someone better, that she no longer needed him. But now, the truth stood before him. Undeniable, irreversible. The twin boys were his. While he had been signing contracts and sealing billion-dollar deals, Cassandra had been fighting alone, raising them, protecting them, without him. A sharp pain twisted in his chest. Have I lost her forever? It wasn't just regret, it was something deeper, something raw. No amount of wealth or power could undo the past. He could never make up for the years he had missed. But one thing was certain: no matter how much Cassandra hated him, he would not abandon his children. Not now, not ever. He had made one mistake. He wouldn't make another. Across the resort, in a villa just a short distance away, Cassandra couldn't sleep either. She sat by the window, staring out at the moonlit ocean, her hands wrapped around a cup of untouched tea. She should have felt relief that he was gone, that he had walked away without a fight, but instead, her heart felt like a battlefield. For 7 years, she had told herself she had moved on, that she no longer needed closure. But now, for the first time in 7 years, Adrian Vaughn was here. And nothing could prepare her for what came next. The world moved fast when it smelled a scandal. By morning, the whispers at Solara Cove had turned into an all-out media frenzy. An undercover reporter, blending seamlessly with the other guests, had managed to snap a picture of Noah and Liam, laughing, running carefree along the shoreline. They had no idea they were now at the center of a growing storm. The image spread like wildfire, attached to an explosive headline. Billionaire Adrian Vaughn's secret family, the woman he left behind, finally revealed. And with that, the feeding frenzy began. Photographers arrived at the resort, their cameras hidden behind sunglasses and beach towels, lurking near the villas. Their mission? To get closer to Cassandra Ellis and her sons. Cassandra sat on the lounge chair, watching her boys build sandcastles on the beach, their laughter blending with the sound of the waves. For a moment the world was peaceful. Then her phone buzzed. She ignored it at first, then it vibrated again and again. With a sigh, she reached for it. A message from a friend. "Cass, what's happening? Have you seen the news?" Another from an old colleague. "I just saw your picture online. They're saying you're the mother of Adrian Vaughn's kids. Is it true?" Her heart stopped. Frowning, she opened the browser and froze. Her face stared back at her from countless headlines, her children's faces. A wave of nausea washed over her. She had spent years protecting them from the spotlight, keeping their lives private, making sure no one, not the media, not the world, and especially not Adrian Vaughn, could touch them. And now, in a matter of hours, the entire world was speculating about them. Her hands trembled as she scrolled. More articles, more photos, wild, baseless theories. Who is Cassandra Ellis, the mysterious woman who vanished from Adrian Vaughn's life? Adrian Vaughn's alleged heirs, are these twins his children? Secrets of the billionaire's past, what is he hiding? Her chest tightened. She had to get out. Her mind made up, Cassandra threw open her suitcase and began shoving clothes inside. She couldn't stay here, not now, not when her boys were about to be dragged into a media circus. "Boys, we're going home, pack your things." Noah and Liam looked up, confused. "But Mommy," Noah's lower lip quivered. "We haven't seen the dolphins yet." Cassandra clenched her jaw, her heart aching. She had wanted this vacation to be perfect, for them to experience something magical, something normal. But nothing about their lives was normal anymore. She took a deep breath, forcing back the lump in her throat. "I know, sweetheart, but we have to go, now." She would not let them be pawns in someone else's game. She was leaving Solara Cove for good. Dragging her suitcase behind her, Cassandra stepped out of the villa, with her boys close beside her. Every step felt like wading through judgment, the hushed whispers, the lingering stares, the weight of being exposed. She quickened her pace. She needed to get away from the rumors, away from Adrien, away from everything he had brought back into her life. But then, "Mommy, my head feels dizzy." Cassandra's steps faltered. She turned just in time to see Liam pressing a hand to his forehead, his little face twisted in discomfort. And then he swayed and collapsed. "Liam!" Cassandra's scream tore through the air. She was on her knees in an instant, cradling his small, trembling body. His lips were pale, his breathing shallow, his tiny fingers curled weakly around hers. Panic crashed over her like a tidal wave. "Liam, baby, wake up, please!" A shadow loomed over her. "What's going on?" She whipped her head up. Adrien. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were filled with something raw, something close to terror. I don't know, he just fainted." Cassandra's voice cracked. "I need to get him to a doctor." And before she could say another word, Adrien scooped Liam into his arms, then he ran, faster than he ever had in his life. Cassandra sat by the hospital bed, her hands never leaving Liam's. His tiny fingers were warm but fragile in her grasp. His breathing had evened out, but his face was still too pale. She could barely hear anything over the sound of her own heartbeat. A doctor entered, checking Liam's vitals. A deep frown crossed his face. "He has a high fever." And just like that, Cassandra felt her world tilt again. And Adrien, he refused to leave. The doctor's voice was calm but firm. "Exhaustion. It looks like he suffered from heat stroke combined with stress." Cassandra's stomach twisted with guilt. She had been so focused on getting away that she hadn't noticed Liam wasn't feeling well. Beside her, Adrien stood motionless. His hands were clenched so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. He had spent a lifetime in control of boardrooms, billion-dollar deals, and the unpredictable tides of high finance. But now he felt powerless. Every minute felt like a lifetime as he watched his son lying frail and feverish on the hospital bed. And for the first time, the weight of everything he had lost came crashing down. He had missed it all. Liam's first steps, his first words, his first scraped knee, his first fears, his first dreams. 7 years. The realization hit him like a knife to the gut. Cassandra stole a glance at Adrien. He hadn't left. Not once. He had skipped his meetings, his empire, everything, just to stay. Her gaze flickered to his hand, resting on Liam's small forehead. It trembled slightly as he brushed away damp curls, his eyes dark with worry. For 7 years, she had hated him. But this man, the one sitting beside her son, watching over him like his world depended on it, this wasn't the Adrian Vaughn she remembered. This wasn't the ruthless CEO who had walked away without a word. This was a father, a man who was terrified of losing his son. Adrien gently tucked the blanket around Liam's small frame, his voice a quiet murmur. "You're going to be okay, little guy." Cassandra turned away, her fingers wiping at the tears that had begun to fall. For 7 years, she had done this alone. She had carried the weight of pregnancy without support. She had rocked her babies to sleep through sleepless nights, answering their innocent questions about their missing father, not knowing what to say. And yet, for the first time, a small part of her wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to do this alone anymore. Sunlight streamed through the hospital window, bathing the room in soft gold. Liam's eyelashes fluttered, his small chest rose and fell steadily. Then his eyes opened. "Mommy." Cassandra let out a choked sob, relief washing over her. "I'm here, baby." Liam blinked sleepily. Then his gaze drifted to the tall man sitting beside him, Adrien. A silent beat stretched between them. Liam stared at him, his small face filled with curiosity, but also caution. Adrien let out a soft, hoarse chuckle, exhaustion clear in his features. "Good morning, buddy." Liam tilted his head slightly. Then he turned back to Cassandra. "Mommy, who is he?" The question struck like a dagger. Cassandra's breath caught in her throat. Adrien sat frozen, his expression unreadable. For a moment, no one spoke, because neither of them knew what to say. But one thing was certain. Adrian Vaughn wasn't leaving this time. He wouldn't run, not again. Adrian Vaughn had spent his entire career controlling the narrative. But this time, the story wasn't about corporate power or financial dominance. This was personal. And it wasn't just his reputation at stake anymore. It was Cassandra and their children. He wouldn't let them be dragged into a media circus. It was time to take control. That afternoon, Adrien personally contacted the press. A formal press conference was scheduled at Solara Cove's Grand Hall. This wasn't part of his original plans. But for the first time in his life, his career took a back seat to something more important. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the hall filled with reporters, photographers, and flashing cameras. Live news broadcasts aired worldwide. The media frenzy had reached its peak. And then, Adrian Vaughn stepped onto the stage. He was calm, resolute, unshaken. Hundreds of eyes locked onto him, and then he spoke. "I know you all have a lot of questions." His voice was steady, strong, his gaze unwavering. "I am not a man who shares my personal life, but today I will speak because I will not allow these children or their mother to be hurt by baseless speculation." The room fell silent. He inhaled deeply. Then he dropped the truth like a bomb. "There is a very strong possibility that the twin boys are my children." The hall erupted. Whispers spread like wildfire. Camera flashes became blinding, but Adrien raised a hand. "For 7 years, I didn't know, but now that I do, I won't run from it." His voice carried something no one had ever heard from him before: vulnerability. "Regardless of the DNA test results, I will take responsibility. If they are my children, I will do everything in my power to be a father to them." A pause, then a bitter smile. "And if they aren't, I will still protect them as if they were my own." The press froze. This was not the Adrian Vaughn the world knew. The ruthless, untouchable CEO was standing here admitting his mistakes, declaring his commitment to 2 children he hadn't even confirmed were his. Across the resort, Cassandra watched it all unfold on a screen. She couldn't move, couldn't speak. Adrien had just exposed his personal life to the world, and he had done it for her. For their children. For 7 years, she had hated him. But now, she didn't know what to feel anymore. After the press conference, Adrien went to find her. There was no arrogance in his stance, no cold detachment. Instead, his eyes were filled with regret and determination. "I know you can't forgive me overnight," he said softly, his voice steady but pleading. "But please, don't push me out of their lives." Cassandra stood frozen. For 7 years, she had raised their children alone. She wanted to shut him out, to protect her heart. But something about his expression, his voice, the way he looked at her, and their boys, it felt real. For the first time, she saw a man truly trying to make amends. She didn't say yes, but she also didn't say no. And for the first time in 7 years, she wasn't so sure she wanted to leave anymore. The grand infinity pool of Solara Cove shimmered under the afternoon sun, the water reflecting the clear blue sky. Cassandra stood at the edge, watching as Adrien knelt beside their sons, encouraging them to try swimming. She had been about to decline, still hesitant, still unsure about letting him get too involved. But then, he reached for her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "Let me do this." His voice was steady, filled with quiet determination. For a long moment, Cassandra hesitated. Then finally, she nodded. Adrien stepped into the water first, arms open, ready. The twins jumped in, their laughter echoing through the pool. He held Liam carefully, guiding his little legs as he practiced kicking. He taught Noah how to hold his breath underwater without panicking, his patience never wavering. It was such a simple moment, yet to Adrien, it meant everything. For the first time, happiness wasn't found in power or success. It was found in the sound of his son's laughter. It was found in the splash of water, the trust in their eyes, the way Liam clung to his arm. And Cassandra saw it too. Adrien had changed, and her heart wasn't sure how to handle that. That night, as Cassandra tucked the boys into bed, she reached for a storybook, just like she always did. But then, "Mom, can Uncle Adrien read it tonight?" Cassandra froze. She glanced at her sons' eager faces. Then, slowly, she turned to Adrien. He looked just as surprised as she was. But instead of arguing, instead of hesitating, she nodded. She stepped aside. Adrien sat between the twins, holding the book awkwardly at first. But instead of reading in a flat, business-like tone, he acted out each character, making exaggerated voices, throwing in silly accents. The boys burst into uncontrollable laughter. By the time the story ended, Liam looked up at him, eyes filled with an innocence that made Adrien's chest tighten. "Will you stay forever?" Adrien stiffened. Slowly, he turned to Cassandra, as if searching for permission. She looked away. She still wasn't ready to answer that question. But there was one thing she couldn't deny. The man sitting beside their sons was not the same man who had walked away 7 years ago. The annual Solara Cove Gala was the highlight of the resort's social calendar. Cassandra had no intention of attending. But the twins, too excited to miss it, convinced her otherwise. So she gave in. She wore a simple yet elegant navy blue silk dress, her hair cascading in soft waves. Noah and Liam dressed in matching tuxedos, looking absolutely adorable. And when they arrived, Adrien was already waiting. He was in a sharp black tux, looking every bit the powerful CEO. But his gaze wasn't on the glamorous crowd, it was on her. "You look beautiful." His voice was low, meant only for her. Cassandra avoided his gaze, but her heart skipped a beat. The gala was held on the beach under a sky dusted with stars. As the music softened, Adrien stepped forward. He held out his hand. "May I have this dance?" Cassandra hesitated. But then, 2 small pairs of eyes looked up at her, hopeful. She sighed, and slowly, she placed her hand in his. They moved in perfect sync, just like they always had. Before the pain, before the heartbreak. For a brief moment, it felt like time had rewound. Like they were just Adrien and Cassandra again, 2 people in love. Suddenly, Adrien stopped. Cassandra tensed. He didn't pull out a ring. He didn't make a grand dramatic speech. Instead, he knelt. Not just in front of Cassandra, but in front of Noah and Liam. And with more sincerity than she had ever seen in his eyes, he said, "It took me 7 years to realize what truly matters. I don't expect instant forgiveness, but I'm asking for a chance. Cassandra stood frozen. Noah and Liam gripped her hands, waiting. She felt something inside her break, not in pain, but in release. Tears slipped down her cheeks. But they weren't tears of sorrow, they were tears of healing. She took a deep breath, and then she nodded. "We can try." There was no grand applause, no dramatic cheers, just the soft crash of waves, the glow of the stars, and the quiet sound of hearts mending. Adrien squeezed her hand. Noah and Liam rushed forward, throwing their arms around her. Then, after a small hesitation, they turned to Adrien, and for the first time ever, they whispered a single word, a word he never thought he would hear. "Dad." That night, Solara Cove witnessed a different kind of miracle. Not a business deal, not a billion-dollar investment, but the moment a family found their way back to each other. The vacation at Solara Cove had come to an end. No more lavish dinners by the beach, no more nights dancing under the stars. Reality was waiting, and this time, they would face it together. Cassandra, Adrien, and the twins boarded a commercial flight. A strange sight, considering Adrien was used to private jets and first-class business lounges. Cassandra had never imagined flying beside him again. But she also knew he wouldn't let the children leave without getting answers. As the plane ascended, Adrien watched as Noah and Liam eagerly pressed their little fingers against the window, gazing at the endless blue sky. Their excitement was pure, innocent, untouched by the complexities of the adult world. A small smile appeared on Adrien's lips, one he didn't even realize was there. For the first time, he felt something unfamiliar, yet deeply natural. A sense of belonging. Cassandra saw it. There was no pretense in him anymore. Only a father trying to make up for the lost years. Cassandra's home was in a small, peaceful seaside town in California. It wasn't extravagant, not the kind of place Adrien was accustomed to, but to her and the boys, it was home. And now, it was the place where their new chapter would begin. A few days after they returned, Adrien showed up at her doorstep. No flowers, no expensive gifts, just a plain paper bag filled with pastries, the ones Noah and Liam loved. Cassandra opened the door, her eyes widening in surprise. "Adrien?" He gave her a small, unbothered smile. "Let me in." A pause. "Can I be a guest for a while?" Adrien didn't rush. He didn't demand a place in the boys' lives. Instead, he adapted. He drove them to school. He helped with their homework. He tried to cook breakfast, even though his first attempt at eggs was a disaster. He took small steps, but they mattered. One weekend, Noah and Liam begged Cassandra to take them to an amusement park. She hesitated, but then Adrien spoke first. "Let's go. I'll drive." Cassandra blinked. Did he just say we? For the first time in 7 years, they went out together, like a real family. At the carnival, the boys giggled when Adrien failed miserably at winning them a stuffed bear. For the first time, Cassandra saw him not as a polished businessman, but as a man trying to be a father. Adrien had spent his life eating expensive meals in boardrooms. Dinners were always about contracts, mergers, and investments. But here, at the small wooden table in Cassandra's kitchen, everything felt different. It felt warmer. Liam excitedly talked about his soccer game. Noah proudly showed off his art project. Adrien sat there, listening. And for the first time, he realized this was what he had been waiting for his entire life. One night, Liam had a fever. Cassandra panicked, her instinct as a mother taking over. But Adrien acted first. He picked Liam up, whispering reassurances. He brought a cold towel, gently pressing it to the boy's forehead. He helped him take his medicine, stayed by his side until he fell asleep. Cassandra stood there watching, and something inside her shifted. For 7 years, every sickness, every fear, every sleepless night, she had done it alone. But now, for the first time, someone else was sharing that burden. She said nothing. But in her heart, something had changed. One night, after the boys had fallen asleep, Cassandra stood on the porch, staring at the sea. She heard footsteps behind her. Adrien stepped up, standing beside her. For a moment, they simply listened to the waves. Then he spoke. "Did you ever think I'd come back?" Cassandra took a slow, deep breath. Then finally, she whispered, "Then why did you push me away when I did?" She turned to him, her eyes deep, filled with old wounds. "Because I was scared." His voice softened. "Scared of what?" Her gaze didn't waver. "Scared you'd leave us again." Adrien froze. And in that moment, he knew. She wasn't ready to forgive him, but she was no longer shutting him out. Adrian Vaughn stood motionless, Cassandra's words echoing in his mind. Scared you'd leave us again. Her voice was quiet, but it hit him like a heavy blow. He had missed too much. He had hurt the woman he loved too deeply. But this time, he wasn't leaving. Slowly, he took her hand, his grip steady. I won't leave again, Cassandra. This time, I'm staying. She stared at him under the silver glow of the moonlight. For the first time, she saw the sincerity in his eyes. But could she trust him again? Cassandra couldn't deny it anymore. Adrien had changed. He cared about Noah and Liam. He was no longer the cold man who only cared about money. But fear still lingered in her heart. 7 years ago, he had left. Who could guarantee that 7 years later, he wouldn't do the same? One afternoon, Adrien took Cassandra to a small cafe near her home. They sat across from each other, the quiet hum of conversation around them. Without a word, he slid an envelope across the table. Cassandra frowned. What is this? Adrien didn't speak. He just watched her. Curious, she opened it. Her breath caught. It was an official document from his company, a resignation letter. She looked up, stunned. Adrien, this is... Her voice faltered. I left my company. Cassandra couldn't believe her ears. Are you crazy? That's your entire career. Adrien nodded, his gaze unwavering. And you and the kids are my family. He took a slow breath. A career can be rebuilt, but if I lose you and the kids again, I could never forgive myself. Cassandra was speechless. For the first time she knew, he had truly given up everything for her and their children. From that day on, Adrien stayed. He drove the boys to school every morning. He helped them learn to ride their bikes without training wheels. He tried cooking breakfast, though his sunny-side-up eggs still weren't perfect. One afternoon, Noah and Liam came running into the living room, holding a drawing. Cassandra, sitting on the sofa, raised an eyebrow. Mom, we made this. She took the picture and gasped softly. It was a drawing of a family. Cassandra, Noah, Liam, and Adrien. In the picture, Adrien was holding their hands, standing beside her. Cassandra's heart tightened. The boys already saw him as part of the family. But what about her? Liam looked up at his mother, his big eyes filled with innocence. Mom, do you love Dad? Cassandra froze. Adrien stood silent, waiting. For the first time, she didn't know what to say. One evening, Adrien took Cassandra to the beach near her home. The waves kissed the shore, the moonlight casting a soft glow over them. Adrien turned to her, his voice quiet yet firm. I've made a lot of mistakes in my life. He inhaled deeply, but this time, I want to make it right. And then, he knelt. Not just in front of Cassandra, but in front of Noah and Liam. He pulled out a sparkling ring. Cassandra gasped. Cassandra Ellis, will you give me the chance to love you again? Her eyes glistened with tears. From a distance, Noah and Liam stood watching, their faces filled with anticipation. Cassandra let out a breathless laugh, wiping her tears. You idiot, she nodded. I accept. Adrien grinned, stood up, and pulled her into his arms. Noah and Liam cheered, running up to hug their parents. Their wedding was small, intimate, perfect. Held on the beach beneath the setting sun. Noah and Liam were their little best men, holding the wedding rings. When Adrien placed the ring on Cassandra's finger, his voice was filled with nothing but love. This time, I will never leave you again. Cassandra smiled, squeezing his hand. And I won't either. 7 years of separation. 7 years of pain. But in the end, they found their way back to each other. Love isn't about perfect endings. It's about patience. It's about responsibility. It's about the willingness to correct mistakes. Adrien learned that his career meant nothing without his family, and Cassandra learned that sometimes love deserves a second chance. Children need both parents, and genuine love can always heal past wounds. Most importantly, love is not something that can be bought with money or fame. It's the daily effort to be worthy of the ones you love. Thank you for following our story. Did this story touch your heart? Leave a comment below. And if you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel.